Hey, Crawlspacers, we're here at the Chicago Comic-Con with Alex Saviuk. Alex, how many years have you been going to this?
This is my third Wizard World Chicago Con. I guess I started back in maybe around 2003. Yeah. Did one about 4 or 5 years later, and here I am 4 or 5 years later.
I have to tell you did a beautiful commission for me of the Upside Down Kiss. Thank you for that.
Oh, no problem. I think that's probably maybe the second or the third one I've done. Right. And since, I guess, the movie came out, and it's always fun to do that one. Yeah. It's a bit of a challenge to get the whole thing to look right, but we get it done.
As I told you earlier, next to Romita Sr., your Mary Jane is my favorite.
Oh, well, thanks. I do appreciate it. Actually, when I was growing up, John Romita Sr. and his entire family lived in the next town over from me, so I got to go to high school and meet his oldest son, who was around the same age, and so I got to go over to John's house, meet him, and see him drawing away at the, had some FF and Spider-Man pages on his drawing board.
Little did you know.
Little did I know, but before that, I mean, his Spider-Man became one of my favorites, obviously, and just the way he drew the characters, and Mary Jane, obviously, at that point, he got to be the one to draw the big reveal, because I think in the issues prior to that, she was sort of hinted at. Ditko would draw her from behind, but when Johnny drew her, forget it. She was.
I wonder what Mary Jane would look like if Ditko did draw her without the flower in her face,
Right, because if I'm correct in my thinking, I think he had her wearing some sort of a green, like a suit with a skirt and maybe a hat, and so she probably would have looked obviously a lot different.
Exactly. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but I do, because I'm a fan of yours. You've been drawing, I think, longer than Romita on Spider-Man. 20 plus years?
I mean, it's been 25 years now since I started working for Marvel, and then the following year when I stopped drawing Spider-Man for them, for the comics, I started on the Spider-Man newspaper strip. So it's 25 years in a row that I've actually worked on Spidey.
So it's 1986, is that right?
I started in 87, okay. filling in on Amazing Spider-Man 292. Right. Then I also filled in on 296, 297. Then from there I moved on to Web of Spider-Man, and from there I moved on to SpiderMan Adventures and Adventures of Spider-Man based on the animated series. And then when those books got unfortunately canceled, as many do, I moved on to some other things, and then I would say that year that I moved on, which was the following year that my book got canceled, the Spider-Man newspaper strip was offered to me. So,
talk about how you got Web back in '87.
Well, that was kind of fun because basically I was asked if I would be interested in filling in a couple of issues of Web, 2-part story for Jim Salicrup. And I said, sure, now why not? I'd love to draw Spider-Man. So basically I got to do those 2 issues, turned them in, and after I turned in the second one, he asked me if I'd like to do another fill-in. And I said, yeah, sure, why not? So the book had a regular artist named Steve Geiger at the time, and he was working on issue number 37, and so they gave me number 39 to draw. And I drew 39, and then he asked me if I want to fill in on another one. I said, sure, and I said, which one? He goes, number 38. So I said, what happened to Steve? And then I guess he just ran into some, personal issues and stuff, couldn't get on it, so I got to do the one before the one that was due earlier or later, whatever. Right. Had to rush that one out, and then after that, they asked me if I want to do some more, and I said, sure, why not? It turned out to be a 4-issue story arc written by Peter David. Right. And somewhere along the lines when the letter column came out, I remember reading that I was now the regular artist. So I called Jim up and I said, wait a second, I'm the regular guy now? He goes, well, I would have figured that you would have known that by now. I said, well, I got to read the letter column to find that out. And we both had a laugh over it. He goes, no, you're the regular guy. And so literally back in those days, I guess if you just met your deadlines and did a good job and the books kept selling, well, that was it.
You're unlike I think some of the modern guys in that you met your deadlines and you stayed on a book for, 7 years with Web?
7.5 pretty much, yeah.
I mean, any advice for those young guys? I mean, you just turn it out like Romita did, etc.
Well, it just seems that, I guess, if I had to say it, I think the marriage, more or less, between a penciler and an inker was a lot different in the olden days than it is now. I think now it seems that the pencilers pencil a lot tighter, so they'll spend a lot more time, let's say, drawing 1 page in 1 day, and then the inker pretty much now is locked into following the pencils and enhancing the pencils, obviously, but having to be that conscious of making sure that they put put in every line that the penciler wants to put down, whereas in my day, we still pencil tight, so all the information was there, but then it's up to the inker to go in and give us some line weights and some depth if we didn't put it in. And so you could afford to see, to be a little bit looser and be able to possibly draw 2 pages a day instead of just 1. Or even if you did 1.5, you're drawing 3 or 4 pages more a week.
And not many people keep a job for 7 years on a book.
Well, people had asked me over the years, gee, how can you still draw Spider-Man? Aren't you sick of it already? And basically, well, of course I enjoy the character, since I was a little kid. But the fact is that the writing was always good enough to keep me intrigued. Spider-Man has a wonderful supporting cast, as you know. And all those characters and then the stories are revolving around those characters were always interesting enough to just keep me going and looking forward to the next story.
You remember your first exposure to Spider-Man? I grew up with the Electric Company, and that's where I first was exposed to him. How did you find Spidey?
Back in the day when I was lucky enough for me to be able to... I was in elementary school at the time SpiderMan #1 and FF1 came out. So, and they were, I think, still 10 or 12 cents at the time.
Not $4.
No. And I was a big DC Comics fan, obviously, because that's all that was there pretty much until Stan came in with his characters. And I remember going to I'll call it a candy store, which we called them in Brooklyn when I lived there, and basically a luncheonette, magazine shop. It's basically the local drugstore without the drugs, okay? So, at any rate, went there with a friend of mine looking for some new books that came in on either a Tuesday or a Thursday, and thought there'd be some DC books. There were none, but I guess he was already reading Spider-Man and FF, and he said, oh, look, here's Spider-Man and FF. Why don't you get these guys? And I said, I don't know anything about them. I don't know who they are, what their powers are. And he goes, no, but they're pretty cool. So it turned out to be Spider-Man #5 with Dr. Doom.
Ooh, nice issue.
And FF #18 with the Super Skrull. Now, what intrigued me about the FF book was I opened it up, and there with the Super Skrull was going through how much better he was than the FF. So where he was describing how powerful he was, the Thing could only lift 5 tons, or how fast he could fly. The Torch could fly like 100 miles an hour. And where he could stretch around the planet, Mr. Fantastic could stretch about 100 yards before he was really starting to strain. And, of course, Invisible Girl could only turn invisible. He had the other powers that I think she later on developed with being able to throw force fields and all that stuff.
And John Byrne later.
Right. So at any rate, here I had all their powers. Now I figured, wow, now it's just a matter of time of finding out how they got there, but I'll get that eventually. And so I bought those 2 comics and was really intrigued by it and just said, wow, these are really cool. Now, of course, I was concerned because that meant somehow, some way, I had to get another 20 or 25 cents up to get those 2 books. And then Stan's advertising Avengers and X-Men and Iron Man. And I'm thinking, wow, maybe I should look into those.
You're going to go broke.
Now I was really nervous because I don't know where I was going to get that extra $1 every month in order to pick up those books. But somehow I managed to do it. I'm getting pretty much my favorite ones. Maybe had a substitute, let go a couple of DC books to get the Marvels. And then, of course, as kids, we always traded a lot. So
one of the, going back to Webb, one of the mysteries of Webb that was never resolved with who is Facade. That was during your run. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Who is Facade? We all want to know.
To be honest with you, I don't think I ever found out.
I don't think we did either.
And I asked that same burning question, but I think after one night of losing no sleep, it was burning no longer. So that's pretty much all.
Dan Slott did a recent issue with Spider-Man. After all these years, I'm going to tell you who Facade is, and then he whacked him in the face, and we never learned it in the recent issue.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. I guess they don't know who he was either.
Another milestone of yours, you did the Spider Hulk. They've made action figures of this thing. I've seen cosplayers of Spider-Hulk before.
Yeah, I know. I've seen a couple myself. That was a lot of fun to do because the issue preceding that one actually had the real Hulk.
Yes.
So, I mean, other than maybe a guest picture here and there, I got to draw the Hulk for an issue, which was a lot of fun. And then, of course, what happened the following issue with him transforming and having me kind of design how his costume's going to rip and whatever. And it was pretty fun. It was pretty good.
Those are my 2 favorite characters. Spider-Man obviously one, but when you combine them, I'm geeking out. Web 100, you designed the Spider Armor. That thing has been in video games and action figures, etc.
Actually, I I want to give credit where credit is due.
Okay.
And Rob Tokar was the editor of Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and maybe all the other books, I believe, at that time. And I remember when that script was coming up, he showed me this sort of, I will say, a quick sketch of what they thought that the spider armor should look like. Right. So he gave me basically the germ of it, and I had to go in and embellish it and put it together. But I'll say I co-created it with Rob Tokar, okay? But I had to do all the little plates of reflective surface on his costume and put the highlights in, and I'll tell you something, people over the years have said, gosh, how can you draw Spidey? Those webs must drive you nuts. Drawing the webs was like eating a beautiful ice cream cone compared to having to work your way through, something you wanted to never eat again for the rest of your life. When considering that the spider armor only lasted one issue, for me at the time, I had enough of it after that one issue.
Glad you didn't do Iron Man, obviously. That would have been...
Well, actually, my first job at Marvel was drawing Iron Man number 211 as a fill-in job.
Okay.
And I always enjoyed Iron Man, and even though he was in one of those, I'd say, transitory costumes that he had, or suits we should call them, where he had it was red and white instead of the red and yellow. And of course there were nuances about it that were different from the armor that I knew. That was a lot easier to draw than if you tried to draw him the way he looks now. The way he, let's say, for example, in a movie, when you create it in a computer, it's on file, and you could use it anytime. When you have to draw it panel to panel with all the nuts and bolts, wow, that would be one of those jobs where if you had to do a monthly Iron Man book, I don't think you could draw more than one page a day with all those things,
And you were smart, you got out before the Clone Saga.
I got out before the Clone Saga, not of my own choosing. I would have enjoyed being on the Clone Saga because I went up to New York to be in on that initial meeting, talking about it and how things were going to progress and proceed. And then shortly after that, I guess my tenure on Web came to an end.
Yeah. We were talking a couple days ago. It all boils down to money or something, or how did you lose Web? I mean, what did they want you to do the other book?
I guess at the time, for whatever reason, sales maybe across the board were starting to dwindle a bit, and I guess as time had gone on and I was continuing my run on Web, writers changed, inkers changed. I was the only one that was the constant, and I guess when sales weren't increasing, I don't know if they were decreasing, but they weren't increasing. I guess the powers that be decided that maybe they should try a change. So they went ahead, and at the same time that I stepped down from Web, they offered me SpiderMan Adventures to draw in my own style, even though it was based on the animated series in a universe obviously away from the typical Marvel universe. And so basically the stories were self-contained. Peter was not married to Mary Jane at that time. He was still dating. They were still in college. But I was under contract, and the stories were still fun, okay? And got to work with, again, some different inkers, artists. And then by issue number 6, though, they did decide that they wanted to go to the animated style. So that's where the style got a lot simpler, and it looked more, let's see, by comparison, I'd say more like a coloring book to what a regular comic book would look like. Storytelling was still the same, the dynamics were still the same, but I guess, if you will, less black areas because they wanted to keep it open for color, just like a cartoon. Okay. Yeah. And
when that wrapped up, you moved on to the comic strip, the newspaper strip?
Well, what happened at the time that I got that the Spider-Man Adventures books came to an end, basically they were canceled, okay? And I wasn't getting work, although we had discussions about some projects that were upcoming for me at Marvel. They weren't coming in fast enough, and I was under contract. But I wasn't. Even though you're under contract, if you don't work, you can't invoice for pay. And so basically I had to get out of my contract because I was offered jobs at other places. The one that I took was drawing the X-Files for Topps Comics. Jim Salicrup had moved actually from Marvel to Topps. I guess he got maybe an offer that he couldn't refuse, editorial, whatever position. And so I drew the X-Files for a little over a year, from issue 30 to 41. And that was a lot of fun because I was a big fan of the show.